My Friend Flicka by Mary O'Hara. Chapter 33. Out in the calf pasture the mangled carcass of the slain heifer lay undiscovered by Gus or Tim or Howard. No one had happened to go just there. With the threat of bad weather and the boss away, Gus had driven the little service truck down to the meadows with Tim to stretch tarpaulins over the haystacks, binding them down with baling wire, hanging railroad ties onto the corners of them. Only the dogs had been to the calf pasture. They were not hungry for their dinner when Howard put it down for them. The dry cows and the yearling heifers wandered around the carcass, but returned to their grazing undisturbed. The mountain lion, lying gracefully along the branch of a cottonwood tree, some distance north of the pasture, was too far to be seen or scented by them. He was gorged to repletion. He would feed again on the carcass of the slain heifer that night, or he would kill again. Mountain lions prefer a fresh kill, and there was plenty here to choose from. At noon he dropped like a plummet from his branch and went down to the creek to drink. Seeing him, the cows and heifers and calves rushed together and stood facing him, heads low, stamping and pawing with their hooves. The lion returned to the place he had come from, crawled through some scrub and rocks to a hollow at the base of a cliff, and went to sleep. The cattle waited for him to return, but he did not appear again. There came then on one of the sudden drumming downpourings of rain. The cattle stood in it gratefully, and moved in a manner that suggested they were loosening their hides and lifting the hair for washing as a bird lifts its wings and opens its feathers. Gus had gone about his work all day, thinking of Flicka. He had not been back to look at her. He had been given no more orders. If she was alive, the order to shoot her was still in effect. But Kenny was ill, McLaughlin making his second trip to town to buy medicines, and would not be back till long after dark. He did not know just what to do. After Tim and Gus had their supper in the bunkhouse, they walked down to the creek. They did not speak as they approached the filly, lying stretched out flat on the grassy bank, just as Gus had left her, but their eyes were straining at her to see if she was dead or alive. She raised her head as they reached her. "By the powers!" exclaimed Tim. "There she is." She dropped her head, raised it again, and moved her legs and became tense as if struggling to rise. The men cheered her on. She rolled over on her belly, reached out her forefeet and scrambled halfway up. "Yee whiz," said Gus. "She got plenty strength yet." "Hi!" cheered Tim. "She's up." But Flicka wavered, slid down again, and lay flat. This time she gave notice that she would not try again by heaving a deep sigh and closing her eyes. Gus took his pipe out of his mouth and thought it over. Orders or no orders, he would try to save the filly. Ken had gone too far to be let down. "I'm going to rig a blanket sling for her, Tim, and get her on her feet and keep her gop. She's got a chance that'll help. If she ain't, it'll do no harm anyway." While they were getting the tools, the post-hole digger and shovel, crowbar, ropes, and blanket, the downpour of rain came again. This time it was persistent. The two men went to the bunkhouse, put on their oilskins, and brought a couple of lanterns with them when they carried the stuff down to the creek. Flicka was just as they had left her. "She's sure going to get another drenching," said Tim. "Won't hurt her," said the Swede. "She been out in thunderstorms since she been born." It took them an hour to rig the sling. They struck rocks in their digging, which had to be prized out. Flicka was lying on a piece of level sward, only a little higher than the level of the creek. To the far side the ground rose sharply behind her in a steep hill which, on part of its surface, was a sheer slide of rock. Another of the rock slides which were characteristic of the terrain of the ranch. The men set to tall and sturdy aspen poles deep into the ground on each side of the filly, then rolled her on to the folded blanket. The ends of the blanket were gathered and the rope tied onto them in a knot, which, the more weight was on it, the tighter it was drawn. The tops of the posts were notched, and a crowbar laid across them. The end of each rope was passed through a hole bored through the post a few inches below the notch, and when everything was ready, Gus said, "All together now." They each pulled on their rope, and the blanket and filly rose off the earth together. When she had reached a height where her feet just lightly touched the earth, they let be, and fastened the ends of the ropes to the crowbar. So she hung, not in the least disconcerted, and when Tim brought her a bucket of water, put her nose in it and drank. While the two men were carrying the tools back to the tool house, the heavens let loose. "We're in for it now," said Tim. "I don't think it could last much longer. I'm glad we got de tarp stretched over dem stacks," said Gus. "De hay's not packed hard." When they reached the ranch house, he handed Tim the tools he was carrying. "I'm going to stop here, Tim, and see if de missus need anything and find out how de little feller is." Tim went on without him, and Gus went into the kitchen, where the oil lamp was hung on the wall beside the stove, and removed his slicker. Nell heard him stamping about and hurried downstairs. "Is that you, Gus?" "Ya, missus. How is de little boy?" "Oh, Gus, we don't know yet. He seems pretty sick." Nell's face was worn and anxious. Standing there, belted in her narrow grey flannel wrapper, she looked slim and childish. Her hair was loose on her shoulders, and she put up a hand and pushed it back with a weary gesture. "Gus, is Flicka dead?" "No'm. Tim and I, we just got through fixing her up in a blanket sling. She can't stand alone, but there's life in her, and she reached for the bucket of water and drank it down like a good one." Nell's eyes sank to the floor, and she stood a moment in thought, tapping her foot. "You didn't shoot her," she said, just thinking out loud. "Gus, did Captain McLaughlin say you didn't have to shoot her?" "No'm. He told me last night to find a time when Ken wasn't around and shoot her. But when I found him like that this morning, I know," said Nell quickly. "I know what you mean. Well, I'll tell Ken. Maybe it'll help him. It'll make him so happy and she's still alive. Gus, now you're here, I want you to set up a cot for me in Ken's room, so I can sleep there and take care of him. It's down in the cellar. You'll have to bring it up." "I know where it is, ma'am," said Gus soothingly. "Now you go up to the little boy, and I'll bring the cot up and set it up for you." Nell ran upstairs and found Ken's eyes wide open. He moved every few seconds, turning from one side to the other. His breath was shallow, often with long pauses between. She sat on the edge of the bed, bent over him and smiled into his eyes with deep, penetrating love. The faintest smile appeared on his lips in answer. She smoothed the hair back from his forehead, then took one of her hands in both of hers and said, "Kenny, did you know that Flicka seems a little better? Gus has fixed a blanket sling for her, and they've got her up in it, and she drank some water when they held the bucket for her." The boy's face changed, as if a light had broken over it, and his lips moved, but no words came. "Maybe, just maybe, darling, she'll live after all. We'll do the best we can, but you mustn't hope too hard." Ken was trying to move his lips again. At last she heard the words, "But Dad gave the order." At that moment, Gus entered the room carrying the cot. Then he brought the mattress, and as they set it up, Ken's eyes followed their movements. Gus tiptoed to the side of his bed and looked down at him. "De filly's up, Kenny. Now you be good boy and soon you be up too." "Gus?" "Ya? Did Dad tell you didn't need to shoot her?" "No, Kenny, but I ain't done it yet, and maybe he changed his mind." Kenny's face changed. He closed his eyes, and a look of dread and pain was upon his lips. Gus tiptoed out of the room, and presently Nell heard a whisper from the bed. "Mother?" "Yes, darling." "Where's Dad now?" "He went to town, dear, to get some medicines the doctor ordered for you." Ken said nothing more. He seemed to be sleeping, and Nell went quietly about the business of making up the cot for the night. Presently he spoke again. "Will he be back soon?" "Any time now, dear, I think." Ken lay with his eyes closed, but Nell, every time she looked at him, realized that he was tense, listening for the sound of the Studebaker roaring up the hill. That's the end of chapter 33. Good night. Sleep tight.